What happens when one stubborn HOA board member values appearances over lives? This community was about to find out the hard way. In the quiet foothills of California, nestled among rolling golden hills and groves of dry oak, sat the neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates. At first glance, it was the picture of suburban perfection: neatly trimmed lawns, pristine sidewalks, and houses built close together, each with matching fences and flower beds approved by the HOA. But beneath that perfect surface was a ticking time bomb, and her name was Karen. Karen had risen to power on the HOA board with a mixture of charm and intimidation. She prided herself on upholding community beauty standards, and spent endless hours patrolling the streets with a clipboard, hunting down even the smallest violations. A slightly overgrown hedge? Citation. A mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige? Fine. And when it came to landscaping consistency, Karen saw herself as a guardian of neighborhood order. But that summer, California was baking under a brutal heatwave. The hills surrounding Willow Creek were dry as tinder, and local fire officials sent out urgent warnings: clear defensible space, trim back brush, and remove dead trees. It was simple fire safety. For many neighbors, it was common sense. Yet Karen didn't see safety, she saw an aesthetic problem. She declared at the next HOA meeting that residents could not cut back their shrubs and grasses beyond the approved landscaping design. She claimed that removing brush ruined the look of the neighborhood and would lower property values. And, since she controlled the HOA's vote, her ruling became law. Neighbors grumbled but complied, fearful of fines and penalties. Some whispered that Karen cared more about appearances than people's lives, but in Willow Creek, defying the HOA was a risk no one wanted to take. So the brush stayed, the dead branches piled up, and the fuel for a fire quietly accumulated around every home. Yet what no one knew was that the match had already been struck, just not yet lit. And while the neighbors simmered with frustration, the hills around them grew drier, the wind stronger, and the fire season more dangerous. Karen thought she had won, but the story of Willow Creek was only beginning. What happens when a neighborhood is silenced by rules while danger creeps closer each day? The answer was coming, and it wouldn't wait for approval. As the weeks passed, frustration within Willow Creek boiled beneath the surface. Neighbors tried small acts of defiance. One family cleared a narrow strip behind their house, only to find a warning letter taped to their door. Another sprayed down their yard with water daily, driving up their bills in a desperate attempt to make up for the dry brush. Karen was relentless. She drove around the community, snapping photos of violations, posting smug updates in the HOA newsletter about maintaining our proud landscaping identity. But then came the warning signs. Smoke plumes were spotted in distant valleys. News channels reported on fires breaking out just a few towns away. Fire crews begged communities like Willow Creek to take action. The state even issued official guidelines, recommending a 30-foot clearance zone around all homes. Yet within Willow Creek, the HOA's rules stood stronger than state advice. Neighbors gathered quietly in kitchens and backyards, whispering about Karen. They were furious, but also scared. She had made herself untouchable, and anyone who resisted her rulings faced heavy HOA penalties. Yet everyone felt the same unease: if a wildfire came, this neighborhood was a death trap. The tension came to a head when a small fire erupted just 5 miles from Willow Creek. Flames tore through dry hillsides, devouring trees and forcing evacuations. The residents of Willow Creek watched the news in horror. That could have been them. That would be them if things didn't change. But when confronted again, Karen doubled down. She dismissed the fire as hysteria, insisting that brush clearing was ugly, destructive, and unnecessary. It was in that moment that the neighbors realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just wrong. She was dangerous. The people of Willow Creek were trapped between fear of the HOA and fear of the fire. And while they hesitated, the flames outside crept closer. Every day, the winds grew stronger, and every night, the hills seemed darker. It was no longer a question of if the wildfire would come. It was only a question of when. And when it came, there would be no stopping it. You've heard of bad HOA rules. But what happens when those rules turn into fuel for a disaster? This is when the nightmare began. The day started like any other, blistering heat, the sun beating down, and air so dry it felt sharp in the lungs. By noon, the sky darkened with smoke. Sirens wailed in the distance. A fire had broken out in the hills, and this one was moving fast. Within hours, the wildfire was racing toward Willow Creek. Winds pushed flames over ridges, sending sparks raining down like fiery hail. Neighbors rushed into panic mode, scrambling to gather belongings and evacuate. But when they looked around their yards, they saw the truth: their homes were surrounded by fuel. Dead shrubs. Dry grasses. Stacks of trimmed branches Karen had ordered them not to remove. The firestorm hit like a wall. Flames leapt from yard to yard with terrifying speed. Wooden fences became torches, and embers carried by the wind set rooftops ablaze. The very rules Karen had enforced had turned Willow Creek into a fire's playground. Panic erupted. Some families barely escaped, driving through thick smoke as fire crews rushed in. Others stood on rooftops with hoses, desperately spraying water against walls of flame. And where was Karen? Neighbors saw her frantically trying to defend her own home, surrounded by the same dry landscaping she had forced on everyone else. The irony was cruel: the very beauty she worshipped was now destroying everything she had built her power on. The fire didn't discriminate. House after house burned, and Karen's rules went up in smoke. But the real damage wasn't just to property. It was to trust, to safety, to the idea that rules meant protection. In Willow Creek, the fire exposed the truth: Karen's control had left them all vulnerable. By nightfall, half the neighborhood was gone. The flames moved on, leaving behind a wasteland of ash and ruin. And in that ruin, a new kind of fire was building, not of flames, but of anger. Because the neighbors of Willow Creek were no longer afraid of Karen. They were furious. Some HOA dramas end with fines. Others end with lawsuits. But this one ended with a reckoning no one would forget. When the fire crews finally extinguished the last flames, Willow Creek looked like a ghost town. Blackened trees, melted cars, and homes reduced to chimneys and rubble. Families stood in shock, staring at the ruins of what had once been their dream neighborhood. And in every whispered conversation, one name came up: Karen. The anger spread like wildfire of its own. News reporters swarmed the scene, capturing stories of how residents had been prevented from taking basic safety measures. Headlines blared: HOA rules blamed for fire devastation. Experts explained how simple brush clearing could have slowed the flames. Neighbors spoke openly, sharing how they had been threatened with fines for trying to protect their homes. And Karen? She became the face of the disaster. Footage of her house burning, after she had demanded others leave their brush untouched, became a symbol of hypocrisy. Online, the story went viral. People across the country couldn't believe that an HOA had valued appearances over safety, and they wanted accountability. The neighbors didn't just want Karen out of power. They wanted justice. Lawsuits were filed. State officials launched investigations into the HOA. And Karen, once smug and untouchable, was forced to watch as her reputation crumbled. She wasn't just a disliked neighbor anymore, she was infamous. But in the ashes of Willow Creek, something else grew. The neighbors, once silenced by fear of HOA rules, found their voices. They rebuilt together, stronger, wiser, and determined never to let one person's obsession with control endanger them again. The HOA was restructured, its powers limited, and fire safety became the new priority. Karen had demanded beauty at all costs. In the end, the cost was everything: her power, her reputation, and the trust of her community. And that's how Willow Creek learned a brutal but unforgettable lesson. When rules are enforced without reason, disaster is only a spark away.